Alexander Isak. I'm going to ask you this just because obviously it's hot topic at the moment. There's lots of noise around Alexander Isak at this moment in time. There was talk today. One of your co-workers, Alex Crook, wrote a piece around Alexander Isak wanting £300,000 a week. There was also some comments tonight about him training on his own and needing to train on his own because of potential injury. Just real quick thoughts before we let you go on Alexander Isak and that situation.
Yeah, I think Alexander Isak has had a very eventful few days, not playing in pre-season, not being put in the stands. It was down to easing him into the first few days of pre-season. But then post-match, it was down to speculation. And then Newcastle clarified their comments by speaking to sources anyway, and said what he meant by that was not to have Isak in the stands watching because people would speculate and it wouldn't be fair to have the cameras on him. But obviously Howe's pre-match and post-match comments don't quite marry. So he doesn't play and then mysteriously is training alone. And that is down, according to Newcastle sources, to a thigh issue, which came and went because he had a scan, it was clear, and then he was back again training, still alone. So if we take Newcastle at face value, Alexander Isak is not for sale. He had an injury scare. He's fine. And pre-season goes on as normal. And if that is all true, then you would expect tomorrow and the next day and the day after to see Isak in group training. And you would expect him to be involved in the next pre-season friendly. But when you add it all up, it's mighty coincidental that Liverpool make an inquiry, Saudi make an inquiry, the agency that represent Isak did an interview with a Saudi paper and said he's close to deciding what his next step is. All the while, whilst Newcastle would love to tie Isak down, whilst Liverpool and Al Hilal would love to sign Isak. And at the same time as all this is going on with a lot of noise, he's training alone, precautionary, and he's not playing in pre-season. So 2 and 2 either makes 4, and there's something to this Isak story, or 2 and 2 in a transfer window makes 4 million, and there's nothing to this Isak story. And we have to be respectful to Newcastle United. Their position is clear. Alexander Isak is not for sale. But I, like you, Pete, am a Leicester fan. And you will remember Wesley Fofana.
Segued that in. I like that.
You remember Wesley Fofana was not for sale, not for sale, not for sale, publicly, privately, for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then he agitated and suddenly he was a Chelsea player. So I think it is a fluid situation. My understanding is there is a number that Isak will be sold for. It's just whether it's this window, whether it's January or whether it's next summer. And it has to come to a head because there's only so many times that Eddie Howe can be asked about it. There's only so many times that Newcastle will want to have this conversation. There's only so many times that Newcastle will want to be in recruitment meetings or speaking to other players who will also ask them, is Isak staying or going? If Wissa's a lead striker, is he competing with Isak? Is he playing behind Isak? Is the formation changing? Players are going to want to know, as well as agents, as well as suitors, and most importantly, Newcastle United fans. So I think we're at an extreme scenario now. This is my read of the situation where there is a possibility of an exit because we know that Newcastle made an inquiry. Liverpool made an inquiry. So there's clearly a push from suitors. And you can ignore that as much as you like. And it was definitely battered when I exclusively revealed that Liverpool hadn't given up, that Liverpool would try, because everyone obviously being passionate about Newcastle United doesn't like the prospect of an exit. And they don't want to hear that there might be an exit. And they want to believe Darren Eales' public words and Yasser Al-Rumayyan's backing that this is just not a player that Newcastle United will sell. But there is a push from people to see whether that resolve is genuine. And then at the other extreme, there's a firm desire of Newcastle to end all of this and get Alexander Isak to sign a new deal. And I'm not so sure that there can be a middle ground. I think 6 months ago, my feeling was, speaking to sources, that Newcastle didn't really care because if they got Champions League football, Isak's really well paid as it is, and he's contracted until 2028. So Newcastle hold all the cards. And 6 months ago, that was my firm understanding. that even if he doesn't sign a new deal, even if somebody bids a British transfer record, Newcastle can just say, we've got Champions League and he's well contracted and he's well paid. But I think the player's head has been turned. That's my feeling. And I think within Newcastle, they know that. And to turn the head back, you've either got to reward him with a new deal, potentially with some kind of guarantee that he can still go in a year or 2 years or seasons without Champions League football. Or alternatively, you have to turn a desire not to sell for, we'd rather not sell, but there is a price. And that's the two extremes I think we're at. Number one, Newcastle don't want to sell. Number two, they'd love him to sign a new deal. Number three, they'll engage with him over a new deal. Or number four, at the right number, they might have to consider it now because it would be crazy money, incredible money, maybe even £150 million. And if the player's head is really turned, there's not much that you can kind of do in that scenario. So now we have to wait and see whether Liverpool return because they've got Hugo Ekitike. I don't think Isak is going to go to Saudi. I'd be staggered if he went to Al Hilal. That's just my personal opinion. All respect to Al Hilal, you'll know I'm Saudi correspondent for TalkSport. So if Al Hilal come calling and offer him crazy money and he's turned by that, then of course you would have to say it's all just down to the lucrative riches on offer, plus the fact he obviously would buy into Saudi being a developing market. And some might say that it's kind of PIF negotiating with PIF, and they'd almost rather push him to Saudi and take the money than they would push him to Newcastle and take the money. And there might be some sort of conspiracy type theory in that. But at this stage, I think there's a lot of people kind of jumping the gun and there's a lot of noise. And all I've ever really reported is Newcastle want to keep Isak and Liverpool will push for Isak, and Isak would be open to that move if the clubs agree a fee. And that's kind of gone round on a loop in my reporting. The only thing that's changed is that 3 months ago when I broke it, it was dismissed. 1 month ago when I repeated it, it was dismissed. And then when Newcastle United went for Ekitike, Liverpool showed their hand before also bidding for Ekitike. And now it's clear that Liverpool haven't given up. And that's where we stand. And right now, I think the next step will be, are we going to see Isak in training? And if we are, I would be expecting Newcastle United to shout and scream about it and do what other clubs do sometimes and stick it all over social media and show him smiling, maybe even have someone from the club do an off-season interview and back up Darren Eales' comments to make it public knowledge that those comments haven't changed. And at the same time, the next pre-season game, Isak should be in the squad. But if we get told that this precautionary scan on a thigh injury that is clear is actually fine, and we still don't see him in group training, and we still don't see him in the next pre-season game, then I think you have to add up all the little things that have happened and say there's too many clues for this to be only a coincidence. And that's when there'll be this period or window of opportunity where I think somebody will be able to make a formal bid for Alexander Isak. And then once again, I come back to what I said before. British transfer record has all manner of different extremes. It can be 1 million over the current British transfer record, and I think it would be rejected out of hand. It could be 130 million. Maybe that stands a chance. It might be 150 million. Or the other theory is that Saudi come bidding with crazy money and that becomes the market valuation, and then everyone has to match that, and that might actually help Newcastle, because this happened with Kylian Mbappe where he was falling out with PSG. Real didn't want to pay the money for Mbappe. There was a Saudi bid. The Saudi bid was world record. Even though PSG were willing to sell Kylian Mbappe for 150 million, the Saudi bid, I think, was 300 million euros or thereabouts. So why did they double the number? Well, they doubled the number because it's good headlines, it's a show bid, and it helps everybody because then the market valuation raises. And if anyone truly wanted Mbappe, they would have had to go a little bit higher or a lot higher to match the Saudi bid. And I can see a scenario where Saudi bid knowing they don't stand a chance for Isak, but they bid at 200 million. And then anyone else that wants Isak this summer has to match that or walk away. And that's not an unthinkable possibility as well. So I appreciate that these are just scenarios and we are speaking about hypotheticals, but the situation with Isak right now is crystal clear. He's training alone because Newcastle say he was injured and not because he was being separated from the group. Newcastle insists that it was always the plan to rest him and Joe Linton from the opening game of pre-season. So I would just encourage everyone, and it's the same in my reporting as well, I'm trying to keep it as measured as possible, to wait a few days, because if Newcastle's position is genuine, and we have to respect that and assume it is, then Isak will be back in group training tomorrow. They'll photograph it, they'll celebrate it, he'll be smiling, and he'll be in the next pre-season lineup. If he isn't, there's only so long Newcastle can keep this not for sale, everything's fine narrative alive, because if more time passes, we might be entering Wissa territory where Isak says, I want to speak to the club about my future. And at that point, it can kind of be the beginning of the end, or you've got to give him what he wants to sign a new deal. So I come back to what I said before, that I foresee two scenarios at either extreme. He either signs a new deal quickly and is rewarded further, or he has to leave the club. I don't know if it can continue, even with Isak well contracted as is, simply because of the volume of interest and the fact that the player's head appears to be turned.
It's an interesting one, really, really interesting, and good sort of open sort of perspective there from yourself, Ben, on a number of different situations with regards to Alexander Isak. My one sort of final question on Alexander Isak to ask you is that, in your own opinion right now, where do you stand with Alexander Isak? Do you think he's got more chance of leaving Newcastle United, or do you think he's got more chance of staying at this point, in your opinion?
And Ben, just to jump in with a little extra one to add on to Heath, do you see the Liverpool option as still open? Because I'll be, where I'm from, Ben. I'm nervous over it. I'm not going to lie. I am nervous over it. And I hoped that this Ekitike move would have put all that to bed. But some people are suggesting that Liverpool are still interested in Isak and they take Isak as well. But is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, I mean, Liverpool are interested in Isak, whether now, whether January, or whether next summer. So the interest won't go away. You don't go from saying you're going to offer £120 million or more to just not being interested. But I think the kind of player Newcastle have in Isak is a long-term profile that Liverpool need. But now they've added Ekitike, they have to determine whether it's a short-term profile that they want to try and bring in now, and at a number that they see value. Because obviously, if nothing was to happen with Isak, then you assume in a year's time, with a year left of the contract, the price drops anyway. So then maybe you get him for what you want to pay now in a year's time. So I don't expect Liverpool to be reckless. But the reason why it's tough to answer that question is because Darwin Núñez is expected to leave, but clubs are struggling to meet Liverpool's valuation. And if he goes, you could say you've got Ekitike and you might need one more. Then if Luis Diaz also departs for Bayern, Liverpool will 100% add another attacker. It's just whether it's a wide attacker, a winger, or another number 9. And then what makes it a bit more complex, and it's important to obviously be sensitive about this, and as a consequence, the journalism lacks a bit of context, because we're not going around as journalists and asking about the Jota situation. We're not translating that into football terms because it's wrong. You have to be respectful, and that whole tragic situation, and condolences once again to Diogo Jota and Andre Silva and their family and their friends and the Liverpool and Wolves communities and so on. But the point is, right now, it's inappropriate, and I think, just my personal opinion, irresponsible journalism to start saying, what kind of attacker do you need? Has it changed in any way because of Diogo Jota? So I'm looking at Liverpool in a Diaz, Núñez-centric bubble, because I want to be respectful. And I'm sure that clubs as well, with players that Liverpool might want, and agents are also doing the same, because more time has to pass. Now, once we get towards the end of the window, Liverpool will have to understand what they need, and the outgoings that are potentially going to happen will influence that. And they'll start to think about the bigger picture as well. And they might even start to look at Mo Salah, who's not going to be there forever. Because remember, Liverpool like to replace a player before the player that they'll replace actually leaves the club. So it complicates it, because you could argue they could do with another number 9 if Núñez leaves. If Diaz goes, they'll be screaming for more of a left winger. Ekitike can play wide as well. So does that mean that he gets some time on the left and then a player like Isak comes in? And the honest truth is, right now, we don't know. And we have to be very sensitive and respectful when dealing with Liverpool sources, because maybe they don't want to talk about what they need with attackers. Maybe they don't want to go into too much detail. It was a bit easier with Ekitike because Newcastle moved. Liverpool knew they had to, otherwise they might have missed out. He's a player that's been on Liverpool's radar for quite some time. But it's much more sensitive with Diaz because Liverpool want to keep him. Diaz wants to leave. No one's met the valuation yet. Nunez was always giving preference to Napoli. They didn't meet the valuation. He could go to Saudi, but does the player want that move? Liverpool would welcome an offer from Saudi. So the simplest one for them was Ekitike, get it over the line quickly. Isak was always going to be complicated and might still be. And again, it will depend on all these moving parts that I've outlined, and we may not have the full context. And we have to be very respectful when engaging with our Liverpool sources and reporting to make sure that we appreciate this as a club grieving too. So things may take a little bit more time. And then regarding the question, will Isak leave? I mean, you'll know me by now. I'm not a journalist to be making percentages or odds guessing. If I know that Isak wants to leave, I'll report he wants to leave. If I know he's going to sign a new contract, I'll report he's going to sign a new contract. I don't think Isak or Newcastle know categorically yet, which is why we're having the fluid situation, which is why Eddie Howe's contradicted himself quite a bit pre-match and post-match. And therefore, I would advise a bit of caution on this story because it is simultaneously true that Newcastle haven't changed their stance at the time we're live and Liverpool haven't given up. And both of those things can be true because during the window, stances can change as per the Wesley Fofana story I told you. And it's really easy to swallow something said publicly by your club, but actually you often find that that public statement, even if it gets forgotten, is consistently wrong. So Brendan Rodgers said in a press conference that Chelsea couldn't even afford Wesley Fofana's left leg. And 2 weeks later, he ended up joining. Leeds United said Rafinha would not go for less than the number that Chelsea paid. 2 weeks later, they sold him to Barcelona for about 5 million less. My club, Leicester, years back said Emir Heskey will never be sold to Liverpool. 3 weeks later, he ended up leaving. Martin O'Neill said that he was not going to leave Leicester for other rumoured gigs. 2 weeks later, he took a new job. So sometimes the club position, even if said in black and white, either changes or is a bit disingenuous because you have to protect your position in the market. Newcastle came out there and said, we're going to sell Isak. Then suddenly you're going to get a free for all and you're going to get a lot of clubs low-balling them. So it is not for sale now. But is it going to be not for sale at the end of the window or January or next summer? I still think that remains to be seen. And I think it's only fair to report with balance at the time. And sometimes what happens is social media takes a small quote out of what you say and you kind of get attacked as a journalist when actually I've given you a 5 to 7 minute answer on all the finesses of Isak to try and give you the perspective of all the sources I'm speaking to on each side. And my reporting of Isak has been very consistent that Liverpool will try, that Newcastle don't want to sell, that Liverpool haven't given up. They proved that by making an approach and saying they'd be prepared to make a bid. And I'm still not aware they've given up now, but I'm still not aware that Newcastle have told them they want to sell. Point is, in all of this, come the end of the window, something's got to give. So either Liverpool are going to walk away because they feel Ekitike is enough for now and they believe that Newcastle's position is genuine, or Newcastle's position is going to change like Brendan Rodgers did, in which case I would fully expect Liverpool to still make a bid. So the Isak saga isn't over, and we'll have to now understand in the next few days whether Liverpool or another suitor get any encouragement by all of these coincidences, which when you add them up, you can definitely tell a story of a player whose head has been turned. But with respect to Newcastle, they're counter-arguing that there's a reason for each thing. So he wasn't in the preseason. It was always the plan. He wasn't in the stands. It was to protect him from cameras. He wasn't in training because he had a thigh injury. Add all of that up, it doesn't look great. It would be very easy for a Liverpool fan to tell a story painting a picture of an unsettled Isak, but that's simply not what Newcastle argue. And that's kind of where we're at with the saga.